Thank you to the alumni and friends of the A. Craig Bear Debate Forum who help contribute valuable donations to ensure that we can continue to do events like these. And then finally, thank you to all of you as our audience members for coming this evening to listen to our four amazing students make their case for how the future of labor should be reshaped. Tonight on the affirmative, we have the University of Iowa. Our first and last speaker will be Lily Severson, and the second affirmative speaker will be Nathan Weimar. On the negative is the University of Minnesota. Their first and last speaker will be Kacee Wells, and their second speaker will be Timur Usenov. Lily, do you want to lead us off?
Everyone ready? Today, we are here to debate the future of labor. To understand labor, we must first understand its present. Israel Gaius paints a stark picture. The outlook for labor in America is both bleak and hopeful. Union representation continues to decline, and weak labor laws are rampant. Union busting leaves unions nearly extinct, just when they're needed most. Current system of enterprise bargaining, where unions negotiate only at an individual workplace, undermines their collective strength. But there is hope. Gaius notes that 68% of Americans support unions, and that support is even stronger among young workers. The path forward lies in empowering those unions to close the power gap between workers and management. Thus, we affirm the United States federal government must create collective bargaining rights for sectors of workers in the United States. Although this idea may be novel to you, it has been well executed across the globe. In places such as France and Germany, sectoral bargaining ensures that no company undercuts one another by slashing pay, creating a fairer and more stable economy. Gaius explains, sectoral bargaining sets standards across an entire industry, regardless of union membership. It transforms organizing and improves workplace conditions. Work-level organizing simply cannot address these issues of fissured employment and hides responsibilities, benefiting only corporations. Sectoral bargaining, however, can hold multinational employers accountable. Think of it this way. It's a difference between fast food workers negotiating at a local chain versus collectively bargaining with the national chain. Only the latter can address the systematic cause of exploitation. David Madlin, a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, outlines the benefits. Sectoral bargaining increases pay, reduces inequality, closes the racial and gender pay gaps, and boosts productivity. It can foster union growth and gives workers a focal point for their activism. It resolves inequality, improves conditions, and empowers workers to shape their future. Now, if we're here to truly discuss what the future of labor is to look like, we cannot ignore AI. Artificial intelligence will undoubtedly have one of the largest impacts on the world of work in the coming years. And each one of us, when thinking about a career path we are likely to choose, has thought about how susceptible that job might be to automation. And as AI becomes more advanced every day, we must pay closer attention. And when we take that closer look, it's easier to find both pros and cons of the coming AI wave. AI has the potential to fundamentally reshape our economy. Joshi, an assistant vice president at the risk analysis for the bank department, writes, if implemented across the national economy, AI will increase productivity and efficiency by automating out repetitive tasks and speeding up decision making. It will boost creativity and innovation through a human AI partnership. AI will have profound implications for national competitiveness. But these benefits are far from guaranteed. There is also a darker side to AI integration. Has anyone in this room heard of AI management? Well, AI management would have an algorithm track, rate, and direct a worker's every move. The computer would decide how fast you should work, when you should take breaks, and whether or not you've done your job well enough to keep it. DeStefanos, a research chair in innovation and law and society, writes about the impact of workers in this dystopian future. Algorithmic management raises vital concerns concerning workers' safety, having huge negative impacts on their mental health. Algorithmic management can be dehumanizing and imposes unrealistic productivity standards, lowers wages, and creates insecure working conditions. So the question then becomes, how do we avoid this dystopian future? How do we ensure the world we enter the workforce, AI is being used to augment, not replace workers? How can we secure the benefits without the negative pitfalls? The answer is sectoral bargaining. DeStefanos continues that despite the dangers that AI poses, unions and collective bargaining are, quote, the most effective tool in tackling algorithmic management. Collective bargaining provides a necessary framework for effective coordination. The collaboration between labor and automation is required to reap the benefits of AI. Ben Obrook, a fellow at the London School of Economics, shares his conclusion in his 23 study that worker voice is integral to securing an effective implementation. Many wrongly assume that unions would hold back innovation or want to stop it altogether. But that's wrong. Van Oprah concludes just the opposite. Studies have shown there is a positive correlation between sectoral bargaining and support for automation. This number is as high as a 176% increase in automation. Unions also can help facilitate public trust in AI. To secure a more hopeful future for labor, Doctors Wing and Sheffe and their paper for industrial relations urge that a trusting workforce is a precondition for successful implementation of new technologies. Union voice helps garner trust in management, encourages better employee engagement, and counteracts economic fears of a botched implementation, leading to a more effective digitalization implementation. And Colin Call, a senior fellow at the Stanford for International Security and Cooperation, and Jim Mert, the vice president of the RAND Global and Emerging Risks, identifies how commercial adoption of AI is critical to propelling prosperity and security. We must create public trust, he says. Otherwise, the private sector would struggle to adopt AI quickly enough to capitalize on the benefits and new value creation. So, today, we invite you to make a choice. Do you wish to continue down a path that will lead labor down AI management and destruction? Or do you choose a future where labor is empowered to overcome the power differential that exists in the current system and give laborers a better, stronger voice in securing a better future? I think you gotta come closer so we're all on the camera.
Yeah, I was assuming everyone
Yeah.
was, so you're just waiting.
We got one mic and camera, so bear with us.
All right. Are you ready?
We are ready.
All right. My first question is, what is sectoral bargaining?
Sure, we explained at the top, as Israel Gaius establishes, sectoral bargaining is the idea that we give collective unions the power to negotiate across an entire sector. Think all of management, or all of like construction, all of hospitality, sectors of employment.
Okay. That leads into my second question. What do you define as a sector? So, for example, my question is, if McDonald's wins a union contract, does that union contract apply to all fast food companies?
Sure, we will say that the sectors we would be defined by the NAIC system. This is the North Atlantic Association agreement that establishes what sectors look like. There's about 27 of them, so it's not you're bargaining just with McDonald's, but rather all fast food industries.
Okay, got it. So next, you repeatedly claim that, well, you mentioned income inequality right now, right? Have we seen any decreases in recent years?
No, we've seen an increase in inequality. That is why it is so critical that we do something because the current path isn't working.
All right. Do unions have a say in the ethical implementation of AI? And if so, how?
Sure, so there's a couple arguments here. The first one is that unions create trust. Trust is a precondition for AI implementation at all. Secondly, unions would help make sure that the good AI gets integrated and the bad ones don't. Workers don't want unethical AI in the workspace, so they wouldn't bargain for its integration at that front.
Okay, sure. Um, why is economic inequality bad for good institutional performance? Like, what is the connection between solving economic inequality and us passing better policies?
We haven't really made a claim about policies. We just think inequality is bad and it's bad for workers, so we should try to do something about it.
Okay, sure. Does collective bargaining lead to better or faster technological adaptation?
We definitely think that it leads to better technological adaptation, as Lily talked about a little bit earlier. Sectoral bargaining would enable unions to bargain over the process of integration of AI to ensure that it's done in an ethical and preferable manner.
Related to that question, what do you think that what speed is automation happening at now?
We would say that there's Kind of twofold. So one, the AI that's being integrated now is bad. That's the AI management stuff. We see companies looking at your mouse clicks. How often are you taking bathroom breaks? You have to make sure that every moment is clocked into the time clock. That sort of AI integration is happening now and is bad and is likely to sort of cause employee unrest. Only
No,
I would
you
say
can keep
only post the affirmative can we sort of speed up that integration to a place where it is only being implemented in effective ways.
Okay, I guess my next question is, what does the affirmative do to automation in terms of replacing humans with robots?
That's kind of key to our claim. We want to augment, not replace them.
Okay, is augmentation or replacement happening now?
Yes, that's what the argument is, that this sort of process of AI management, where they look at your mouse clicks, they look at your bathroom breaks, etc., is the increasingly becoming the status quo. And we see this constantly happening in the current world we live in. Only the affirmative is able to ensure that the integration of AI systems is done in an ethical manner that doesn't do the sort of dystopian monitoring of workers.
How does the affirmative ensure employers bargain with workers in good faith?
Yeah, this is a really important question. So, the way that sectoral bargaining works is it reframes the framework for which both employees and employers engage. Right now, in the status quo, there's no incentive for employers to come to the table because they know that they can just hire someone else who's not in the union. That drastically changes after the plan because it doesn't matter if they want to bargain in good faith because they have to be beholden to these across the standard and everyone applies. So, they can't just find someone else to fill that role.
One last question. Are sectors split between industries? For example, are there multiple sectors within a single industry?
I'm not sure what you mean.
So, like, for example, healthcare, do you differentiate between different forms of care like pediatrics, or is it all in one
Sure, we would argue that there would most likely be a large overbranching kind of sector, but then within those, there's not a limit saying if you want to have a sector, like a collective bargaining agreement at your specific workplace or within a specific sort of sub industry, that wouldn't be precluded.
Great, thanks.
Is everyone ready for the 1NC? Timur and I negate that the United States federal government should strengthen collective bargaining rights through sectoral bargaining for two core reasons. First, is the alternative policy option. Setting up federal worker standard boards empowered to make regulations resolves the harms of the affirmative, but avoids harming the economy by balancing power between the employer and the employee, increasing firm profits. Andreas writes in 2019. Worker boards bring together workers, employers, and the public. They set minimum standards, scheduling, paid leave, training, address wage stagnation, inequality. Boards focus on needs of a particular sector. Their flexibility stimulate effects found significant gains that ensure productivity and sustainability. Second is business confidence and economic strength. A, sectoral bargaining backfires and causes wage decline long term, harming small businesses and increasing prices for consumers. Ferrancio writes in 2021. SB is bad for America. Selling points strip wage competition out. Employees cannot get raises from one employer to the other. It stops attracting talent by outbidding, a huge problem as employees see raises by switching rather than waiting for increase. Harm small businesses because their market share affects how much say a company gets. Larger players have far more say. Less competition means higher prices. Firms no longer compete in price and consumers pay the difference. It forces industry agreements that make the economy far less nimble. B, U.S. business strength is the backbone of our economy. Collapse of confidence all but guarantees extinction. Ferrari and Galloway write in 2022. Dysfunctional policies hamper business confidence. Budgets tighten, deficits rise. They rely on financial institutions to survive, to fight pandemics, climate change, terrorism, conventional war, globally integrated supply chains. China represents a significant threat. Disruptions illustrate implications of rivalry. Great power competition is a game with no discernible end. Reliance on the Chinese market poses challenges. Now to respond to Iowa's arguments. First, their arguments about inequality are misguided and incorrect. A, inequality is declining now and have limited impacts on well-being. Walderston writes in 2025. Claims about inequality rest on selective readings and partial measurements. Full balance sheets, societies are not nearly as unequal. Measures of well-being improved. Evidence shows markets enriched middle-class fortunes before treating as existential. It's worth double-checking. Evidence has limits. Today's levels are far below pre-World War II. Inequality plateaued in the last 2 decades. Correcting flattens the trend dramatically. The US tops 1%. Income is slightly higher. Per adult wealth rising sevenfold. Amounts to financial democratization. Wealth concentration has fallen, and US medium households are far better than raw data suggest. B. Sectoral bargaining empirically fails to address income inequality. Filelshi and Surdovin write in 2025. Cause of income inequality attribute to tech change while demand for less skilled work stagnated, hollowing out the job distribution and demand for less skilled workers. Computerization increases demand for graduates who are high paid and decreases demand for the less educated. In the UK, wage inequality began increasing in the 70s, even as union density continued to rise. Unionization started in the 50s, which is when inequality remained stable. Second, their arguments about solvency miss the boat. A, their sectoral model fails. It decreases union participation, hurts productivity, and causes wage stagnation. USCC in 2021. Sectoral agreements ignore employers' economic realities. 2/3 dissatisfied with working time wages. Too high. Companies avoid the agreement. Empirical evidence shows sustainability of the model is in doubt. Coverage declined dramatically. Studies conclude that the model is clearly on retreat and the outlook is bleak. French sectoral agreements contained outdated restrictions, leading to unproductivity, a lack of productivity. Danish agreements are overly restrictive. Sectoral agreements discourage innovation, rigid without leeway necessary. B. Employers will circumvent bargaining gains and ensure new standards are always manipulated. Verancio 21. Typical of sectoral bargaining. In Germany, employers opt out of these agreements in droves. Wage boards empower wage standards after consultation, left to the discretion of the government. Use wage boards to raise wages. Governor's wage board recommended an increase. C. Sectoral bargaining undermines worker power. It puts the cart before the horse, and it's turned into a tool of austerity. Blanc 23. Sectoral bargaining puts the cart before the horse. Labor leaders treat sectoral as a strategic alternative to the daunting work of organizing workers. Centralized negotiation arose as a response from employers hoping to tame militancy, imposing austerity. Without worker power, sectoral bargaining is unlikely to get implemented. The stumbling block is not a lack of resources. Only by unionizing workplaces can labor start building power. D. Madlin is wrong about nearly everything. Bartlett in 2015. Madlin seems reluctant to embrace spending, instead focuses on micro measures and unions. The scale of programs is so great, such small, boring initiatives are unlikely to accomplish much. Madlin undermines his message because it is too focused on the middle class. Data won't find in Madlin, not a single table. Third, they are incorrect about the direction of automation. A. Automation is proceeding slow and steady, ensuring effective regulation and safe rollout of AI because the relatively higher cost of automation compared to human labor ensures it's not rushed. Thompson writes in 2024. AI predictions are vague about timeline and extent do not consider economic viability. Savings from automating is far less than the cost of developing, deploying, maintaining human workers, and they're far more economically attractive. Only 23% of workers would be cost effective. Labor replacement will be gradual. But sectoral bargaining artificially inflates wages and the cost of human workers, accelerating automation because it makes it immediately more cost effective to replace workers with tech. Kostlin 23. Bargaining power of unionized workers adds a union premium on wages. A union wage premium implies stronger incentives to replace labor with new tech. Wage compressing contributes to making low-skilled labor expensive. Low-skilled labor is more replaceable by automation. Automation causes AI takeover. Slatan and Lipolsky in 2014. Automation leads to a transfer of wealth and power to owners of AGI. AGI will be used to develop weapons and lead to catastrophic risks. AGI behave in unexpected and harmful ways, even if intentions are benign. I'm open for Ross.
Does that work for you, Liv?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Ready? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Who's on the standard boards?
Yeah, so standard boards are integrations of employees and employers that work together to come up with benefits that not only take into account employees' needs, but also the needs of businesses.
I guess a follow-up question to that. You read that it would be employers, workers, and the public. So does that include the government?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. What's to ensure that the government, i.e., like the current executive administration, doesn't just put people on the boards that don't want to see gains for workers?
Well, the government isn't the ones that choose who's on boards. It's kind of the same way that union representation works, which would also be a reason that the affirmative wouldn't resolve that issue.
So the unions would pick who the government
Well,
officials.
no, it is representations from employers that would likely be elected by the employees.
It's kind of similar to how arbitration works. It would be a mutual agreement of who the third party or public representative will be, most likely.
Okay,
Sure.
I have a related question about these boards. This cost off evidence that you've read says that a raise in wages will cause automation. Do the wage boards you've proposed raise wages?
Yes, but we've made a broader argument about balancing. It is not that any wage growth is bad. It is that overwhelming power put in the hands of employees neglect needs and productivities within companies. The boards put both of those standards at equal.
Got it. So the board puts less powers in the hand of workers.
It equalizes power between the workers and the employer.
Okay, sounds good. Relatedly, for wage boards, we have seen several states such as New York, California, and even Minnesota have wage boards in the status quo, but have high levels of inequality. Why would this policy work on the national level?
Well, I think there's two arguments there. I think the first is that it is incorrect that inequality is direct to wages, which is an argument we made on the case page. But secondarily, our argument would be that the secular or limited nature of those programs avoids full rollout because you can move from different companies and different states to avoid kind of in the way that offshoring functions.
It's really interesting because you've read the article that's how-to guide for state and local worker boards. So it's interesting you just made a spill-up claim, but that's okay.
I mean, we're defending it happens nationally. I'm not sure what you're getting at there.
Okay. I had a question about your argument that sectoral bargaining is bad for the economy. You have said that it guarantees extinction. Where does your Farhadi author say that everyone on the planet would die if we had sectoral bargaining in America?
Well, our argument is broadly about institutional response to crises. Our fellow Ray Gandhi, or I'm probably butchering the names, but Galloway evidence states that without a strong economy, we lose our ability to stand up against threats. So the next pandemic, we would have no response to it, which is also true of climate change and just economic collapse generally.
Wait, where does your Farhadi evidence say any of those threats either would be existential or resolved by institutions?
I mean, I find it hard to believe that you want to argue that climate change isn't happening or existential, but even if it doesn't lead to extinction, we think the death of millions of people is probably really bad.
Okay, that sounds good. The arguments you read on Case about why we cause rampant inflation of wages, what is the reason that that would be an inevitable outcome of sectoral bargaining?
I mean, we've made a couple arguments about why the wage spiral happens. We think that the AF overcorrects for imbalance now. It puts too much power in employees' hands, which means that wages will rise too fast to keep up with prices, which pushes that onto consumers, creating inflationary spirals.
Okay, sounds good. We'll take about 30 seconds of preparation before the next speech. Start that now. Yes. Yeah. Okay, awesome.
26 seconds.
Perfect. Is everybody all good? Perfect. Okay, sounds good. Today, you are presented with the decision between sectoral bargaining and wage boards, but the former is the clear choice. Sectoral bargaining reframes the level of negotiations to the entire sector. Only this framework can solve for inequality across the board, ensure AI is integrated to secure economic gains, avoid overbearing AI management, and propel the United States into a prosperous future. Minnesota has raised a few concerns. Their first response is that inequality is declining. However, it has been worsening at an alarming rate. According to the World Bank, The Gini coefficient, which is the best indicator available to measure inequality, has risen steadily in the United States since the 1970s. This is why their own author suggests that pockets of deep poverty persist within the United States. Next, they assert that sectoral bargaining fails to address inequality. Their evidence doesn't say the phrase sectoral bargaining a single time, but it does say that current automation is harming workers. Only sectoral bargaining can resolve this by empowering workers to negotiate over the way in which AI is integrated into the workplace. Moving on to their responses to automation. First, they've suggested that sectoral bargaining will hold back innovation. However, the meta-analysis that we cited from Toon van Olbroek finds empowering workers is integral to effective innovation. Olbroek uses a broader dataset and was conducted 2 years after their case study of Denmark. Next, they claim that sectoral bargaining grants too much discretion to employers. Their author is actually talking about how wage boards are too easy to manipulate. He states that wage boards in New York failed because consultation was left up to the discretion of Governor Cuomo. Only sectoral bargaining can resolve that problem because employers know that if they just opted out of the negotiations, they would still be beholden to the sector-wide negotiations that happened. Next, their Blanc evidence asserts that unions aren't strong enough for sectoral bargaining in the status quo. What they fail to see is that only refocusing negotiations to the sector level will be able to propel union density. This is why Erica Blanc concludes that sectoral bargaining is a desirable goal, which is the author that they've read. Next, they've indicted our author David Madlens. However, they have read a book review of an unrelated article that he published in 2014. You can conclude that David wasn't as scrupulous as he should have been 11 years ago, but that does not indict our 2025 analysis, which found that sectoral bargaining reduces inequality and increases productivity. The last response they have on our affirmative is that sectoral bargaining would cause automation. We have provided robust evidence from Dr. Valerio Desfanos that unmitigated AI integration is happening right now in the status quo. Only sectoral bargaining can resolve the devastating effects that we see on workers and prevent the mental health devastation that's happening now. They argue that union strength causes that automation. However, as we've proven, strong unions are the only bulwark against employers having the incentives now to replace people with robots. They've also asserted that increased wages will cause automation. Their authors are solely discussing the increase in minimum wages in a vacuum. Only sectoral bargaining can resolve the problems with minimum wage increases because they've also enabled workers to bargain over things like whether or not they will be replaced with robots post this transition, which is something that their wage boards they proposed cannot resolve. Lastly, they've said that artificial intelligence with human-like cognition will kill everyone on the planet. Not only has neither side read you evidence that sectoral bargaining would cause such an unprecedented technological breakthrough, but such a breakthrough is mathematically impossible. As physicist Bert Gambini states, the invention of AGI rests on a fundamental impossibility, which is analogous to the creation of a perpetual motion machine. Moving on to Minnesota's proposal. They have offered wage boards as a solution to the problems that workers face now. This policy is woefully insufficient for 4 main reasons. First, wage boards are comprised of employees, employers, and government appointees. Given the current administration, workers stand no chance to outvote corporate talking heads and the pro-business appointees that Trump will select. Second, as cross-examination showed, standards boards have been tried already and failed. We both agree that the status quo is bad for workers, so why would we continue policies that have failed them time and time again? Last, standards boards cannot resolve the problems of AI management in the workplace. Only through employee trust, which standards boards can never ensure, will AI integration be carried out in a manner that is ethical. The final argument that they make is that sectoral bargaining will harm the economy. This is wrong for several reasons. First, their argument about wage competition among employers misunderstands what sectoral bargaining is. It doesn't set a ceiling on wages that would prevent employers from using wages to attract workers. No rational worker would bargain for a cap on the amount that they could be paid. Second, only AI integration can set up businesses, large and small, for a prosperous future. As Colin Cowell and Jim Mert point out, sectoral bargaining is key to ensure that the private sector adapts AI quickly enough to realize productivity gains. We agree with Minnesota that business strength is important, but maintaining a world where workers are exploited, surveilled, and pushed into poverty is not the way to ensure a prosperous future.
It'll take 30 seconds. That was 50 seconds. Right. You should vote negative for three main reasons. First, we have presented an alternative policy option that is more effective and more secure than the affirmative. It avoids both the economic threats and the practical issue that you see with unions now. Second, the economic effects prove that the plan makes things worse before they get better, which ruins our institutions and technological development. Third is that the plan just has too many holes. Workers are still subject to the same laws that enables employers to ignore them. Employers can still fight back with smear campaigns, they can change laws, and they can bargain in bad faith. If bargaining for workers is so strong and so effective, employers will only work harder to prevent them from winning in the first place. It's the only logical conclusion. Now, I'll be talking about our first main piece of offense against the affirmative. I want to stress that the affirmative is correct in proving that sectoral bargaining can, if the affirmative is correct in saying that sectoral bargaining can address inequality, you should be convinced that the means of their approach and their sudden economic effects will be worse than the long-term benefits. Our Vernuccio evidence has great warrants. First, sectoral bargaining creates wage price spirals that continually increase, which only directly and massively impacts the profits of businesses. Second, to attract quality workers, large industries will outbid small businesses through bargaining, which means already giant conglomerations like Amazon and Starbucks will entirely exclude medium to small businesses out of the competitive market. So, while they have good intentions, the paradox is that they only accumulate more wealth and power against the very corporations that are driving inequality in the first place. This is very important. 99% of businesses are small businesses, and they already run 50% of our GDP. Next, specifically, switching to sectoral bargaining causes only worse inflation. Yannick Lecote, professor of finance in 2023, says that another important feature that could drive inflation is how centralized bargaining is. Decentralization has been the main trend since the 80s. This resulted in reduced risks of wage price loops emerging. When sectoral agreements are binding on all firms in the sector, a stronger response from prices to an inflation shock should be expected. Additionally, our Farhadi and Galloway evidence shows how disruption in business security and confidence undercuts our ability to invest, plan, and maintain innovation in global supply chains, which allows issues and conflicts with how our workers are treated in the workplace. Now, I'll be moving on to worker boards. You should prefer the alternative. Our Andreas evidence definitively concludes that worker boards address the same worker management issues as the affirmative, but avoids the bureaucratic walls and financial challenges that unions intrinsically bring with them. It does so by bringing up a similar negotiation process, but avoids the unbalanced worker dynamics that could incentivize going too far with demands or employers fighting back. Workers get stakes in the company's future, which prevents reckless bargaining. Now, I'll be talking more about why sectoral bargaining fails. Their proposal is backwards. It sounds good on paper, but fails in practice. According to the United States Chamber of Commerce, empirical evidence from Germany, France, and Denmark, this very same examples they used in our first questioning, shows that their models fail to satisfy over 2/3 of all worker demands, which might get to the point that they may abandon it entirely. If it fails in smaller economies, there's no hope for it in America. And there's no meaningful way to enforce compliance. Vernuccio argues that employers in Germany constantly opted out of sectoral bargaining and delayed negotiations from being effective. Additionally, our Blanc argument argues that sectoral bargaining tames worker militancy by wooing them into comfort with mere wage and workplace wins like smoke breaks. That means they never go farther than that to adjust structural issues with inequality. We've also indicted their author Madeline, who is the most important author in proving unions are good. He uses very little data and overly focuses on small microeconomic issues. Now, On automation and technology, we've pointed out a massive flaw in the affirmative's argument. Automation development is slow and safe right now. Multiple MIT scholars have shown that costs and labor preferences keep replacements low because it's only 23% as cost effective. But structural barriers like costs and innovation gaps means it can't happen fast. But Costello argued that sectoral bargaining increases labor costs beyond the threshold that prevents AI from being a cheaper option. That means businesses under the affirmatives plan see automation as an incentive because they fear unions overstretching and wage increases, which only causes the very same issues and impacts the affirmative talks about in their case.
We have 2.5 minutes left. Yeah.
Okay. While we have a smidge of downtime as Lily prepares for the final affirmative speech, I would invite you to find a neighbor and talk through 2 questions. What have you learned so far? And what do you hope happens in the final 2 speeches?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like Atlas, what is there? Wait for solve and then we just sort of.
Okay, let us come back for our final speech from the affirmative. Will you check in with the Zoom folks?
Yes. How do I Zoom folks? Is everyone good? Okay, perfect. Alrighty, get started. Today, you are presented with a choice: sectoral bargaining or wage boards. There is very little you can be certain of, but one thing is true. Only sectoral bargaining can reframe the level of negotiations to the entire sector. This framework solves for inequality and ensures economic gains are secured through effective AI implementation. But most importantly, only sectoral bargaining can ensure that AI management is stopped in its tracks. Every day, we see increasing risks of AI takeover, from hyper-aware management deciding when you take your smoke breaks to actually firing you overall. They have not provided an example of how wage boards could do the same. If you cannot tell me how wage boards solve for rampant, unequal, unethical AI, you need to understand that only sectoral bargaining gives workers enough power to do just that. It is important that we shape the future of labor in a direction that ensures workers have a say. Even if this means increasing wages, that is good. We should aim to pull people out of poverty. We should aim to ensure that everyone can put food on the table. Minnesota is going to tell you that wage boards increases wage just enough not to do that. But where's the bright line? Wage boards simply can't tell you the answer. Only through sectoral bargaining, where employees can strike against unfair management practices, can AI be integrated in a way that augments, not replace workers. Now, they've continued to perpetuate this author indict against Madeline. But once again, maybe in 2014, Madeline didn't use enough statistics. However, our most recent evidence tells you the best studies that look at Germany, Denmark, and everything in between conclude sectoral bargaining is good for two things. One, it increases the automation rates in an effective manner. This isn't just willy-nilly. It is creating more prosperity, stronger institutions, and better economic power for companies big and small. Your small businesses need AI to understand how to better manage their day-to-day, their supply chains, but also are at risk if unions are not there. Two, sectoral bargaining also ensures a safer, more equitable future. This looks like getting people the pay they deserve, the PTO that they need. If you don't understand how wage boards do just those same things, you shouldn't vote for it. It is important that we addressed all sides of the issue. And there is very little to be certain of. But there is one thing that both sides agree. The future for labor matters most, because right now is really rough. Every day we see increases in unemployment rates and terrible statistics pop up our news warning of a recession. There is a way to avoid this disastrous future, but it starts when we put worker power back in the hands of workers. We cannot let management and their prerogative decide the future of your life. You should have that control. And only sectoral bargaining provides that bridge. So, as you think about who you're going to vote for at the end of this debate, I ask you to ask yourself, how do we create a better future for labor? How do we ensure that AI does not micromanage us, but rather creates new futures with more economic prosperity and better, stronger institutions? There is only one plausible answer you can conclude. That answer is sectoral bargaining. And as the Hawkeyes take on the Gophers tomorrow at Kinnick, you can have a say in this room here today. This is why we are proud to affirm and strongly urge you to vote affirmative. Go Hawks.
You have 2 minutes and 10 seconds to stop, which will begin.
Okay. While we have a few more minutes of downtime before our final negative speech, check in with the neighbor that you talked to previously and share what you thought about the final affirmative speech.
You should make your profile pic.
Okay, let's come back together for the final negative speech.
Everyone ready? Labor policy isn't just about the paycheck. It's a linchpin for an entire economy, our business climate, and the daily lives of millions. The affirmative insists that sectoral bargaining solves everything, but they misframe the problem and overlook what delivers fairness and resilience. The real danger is not just inequality, but systems that swing far too either extreme. Too much employer control means exploitation. Too much worker control undermines productivity and market survival. The answer is balance. Worker boards are the best solution. By integrating workers as empowered representatives on key regulatory issues like wages, scheduling, PTO, and training, we foster real collaboration. Workers gain a meaningful stake, employers recognize worker concerns, and median policies are incentivized that benefit everyone instead of just a select few. That's our Andreas evidence. The first reason to negate is that sectoral bargaining risks massive economic disruption. If the affirmative is correct that they can sharply reduce inequality, then you should be certain that that sudden adjustment will carry immediate economic risks. Our Varancio evidence is clear. Sectoral bargaining triggers wage price spirals, raising wages faster than profits, inflating costs, and ultimately hiking prices for consumers. Big corporations can pass on this, but small and mid-sized businesses buckle under the pressure, leaving the economy's true backbone vulnerable. They've conceded that 99% of businesses are classified as small and are responsible for half of the US GDP. Undermining this core segment would destabilize the entire economy. Next, our Farhadi and Galloway evidence deepens the analysis. Disruption in confidence undermines investment, planning, and innovation. When small and medium enterprises lose their footing, America risks falling behind in climate action, disease prevention, and technological advances as rivals like China step in. The erosion of business confidence heightens dependence on unstable venture capital and exposes global supply chains to escalating geopolitics. That's Safari and Galloway evidence. Without worker boards to balance interests, Iowa's plan locks the U.S. into economic decline, limiting our ability to counter pandemics, climate threats, and foreign authoritarianism. The second reason to vote negative in this debate is that even if you are not convinced that worker boards are business confidence, the status quo is still preferable to sectoral bargaining. Iowa's key arguments, inequality and automation, both stall under close inspection. First, on inequality, the best evidence shows is simply not skyrocketing. When taxes, transfers, pensions, home ownership, and broad asset ownership are included, Western societies are far less unequal. But even if you don't buy that, another warrant from the Waldenson evidence is that inequality cannot be traced to just wages, but is rather a question of tech changes, which the affirmative has no way of resolving. Second, even if we accept inequality is rising, sectoral bargaining offers little practical improvement. Unions narrowed gaps in their heyday, but what's driving wage gaps now is technology, which I explained above. Now, you should be skeptical of affirmative solvency. Sectoral bargaining doesn't deliver for workers. The biggest flaw in the affirmative is that the very examples they cite in every speech, Germany, France, and Denmark, have empirically failed to satisfy over 2/3 of all worker demands. It's so ineffective that people want to abandon it. We are the only team extending empirical evidence, which means you should prioritize it. The last reason you should vote negative in this debate is that automation is slow and safe. They've conceded that MIT economics show only 23% of jobs are cost effective to automate. The 2A specifically says that sectoral bargaining increases automation. That's our argument. They've refused to respond to the fact the only thing stopping mass worker replacement and automation of the workforce is prohibitively high costs that mean workers are economically advantageous because automation would be more expensive. However, the mass increases in wages necessary to resolve economic inequality in the world of the app upends that and means that it is far more economically viable to replace workers. That means that the only team in this debate that has a chance of causing their AI management impact is Iowa. Good debate.
Okay. For folks in the room, Rose and Spencer are passing along a piece of paper that has a QR code. That QR code will take you to a Google form where you will be able to vote for who the winner of this debate is. Once you've had a chance to pull the Google form up, I ask that you please pass the QR code along to someone else. For folks on Zoom, Paul has already dropped a link for you to be able to vote on the same Google forum. While we are waiting for the results to be tabulated, I want to take the end of the time that we have in our public debate to open it up to questions from the audience. But selfishly, I'm going to ask the first question. So the four of you may want to join me closer up to here so that people can hear you answer the questions on Zoom. My first question for you four is, we are now several months into learning about the history of labor law, into coming to understand the very contemporary controversies that are connected to this topic. And I'm curious if you could each share something that you've learned through your research that you weren't expecting or that you find very meaningful.
You go first, Minnesota?
Sure, I can go first. Well, oh yeah.
I think we'll step up, yeah.
Well, my mom is a steward at the post office, like the national, I can't believe I'm forgetting what it's called. Sorry, mom. But the post office, yes. And she's a steward for her union, and I was always interested in hearing what she was talking about with how her grievances worked and how she was supporting her clients, but I never actually knew how any of that worked. So by learning about what the process of having a grievance and going up to your employer and fighting your employer about an issue I have was really important because it kind of connected me with my mom a little bit more. So that was really cool.
Similarly, my partner works in construction and is part of union, and actually like a big discussion that their union talks about is how to improve kind of cross-company problems, because within a lot of construction companies, you'll move from job site and employer frequently.
Yeah, I can go. I didn't know much about unions or the different proposals for labor in the United States. I'd heard broadly about different countries' approach, but I hadn't really thought about what that means or what that might look like in the US context.
Yeah. I think we've gotten really into it's interesting because in debate you get a lot of arguments very fast. So we've really gotten to see sort of the nitty-gritty of labor law, what it looks like when you play out, how do we avoid some of the pitfalls that other countries are experiencing, which I think are all important questions if we want to kind of as we enter the workforce.
Is there any questions from people in the room?
Because we did such a good job explaining.
Sorry.
Paul, any Zoom questions?
Oh, there's a chat.
I get from Paul.
Okay. Well, I guess I will ask one more question.
Yeah, Tyler.
Obviously, the debate that you just had is this kind of complicated discussion about wage boards and sectoral bargaining. And I'm curious if you could put the hat on of the other team. What did you think as the affirmative, the neg's best argument was, and what did you think as the negative that the affirmative's best argument was?
I can go first. I think that the argument about how government influence within worker boards, and especially the example from New York, oh my goodness, is really compelling, and we weren't exactly sure how to answer that.
It was very smart. I also really enjoyed like that AI governance that companies were doing. I thought that was smart and like made a lot of intuitive sense about how unions could deal with that and interact with unethical AI implementation.
I think for us, one of the biggest things we talked about is what does the swing look like? It is kind of a giant step to go from nothing to sectoral bargaining, especially when we don't have workers. And so, like, to me, I think, like, in debate, we kind of propose the very good end goal, but I think worker boards, if used kind of effectively, could be a very good interim tool. So it was like, how do you prioritize sort of short term versus long term?
Yeah, and I also think that concerns about inflation or sort of the unknown economic outcomes of massive changes, like Willie just said, would be is something that also worries me, generally speaking, about any change.
Dr. Dave has a question.
Do you want to read it for us?
So Dr. Dave asks, should the reliability of the government role in either alternative be a bigger issue in the debate? Should that have played a bigger issue for both teams?
The government role.
the reliability of the government.
Yeah, the current administration we have. I think this is like a really interesting question that's also like playing out largely in college debate right now, just based on the current administration kind of having some anti-labor policies. I'm kind of torn on this question because there is so much debate we could have about any issue, and that's kind of a hard to resolve one. But I think that the level in which we can talk about it in the context of worker boards and sectoral bargaining is probably a good medium.
I think it's like a very realistic concern to bring up in debate about like how does the court system or our administration influence how labor law outcomes play out in effect? Does it like work in favor of unions? Does it work in favor of employers? And I think that's very important, but it's a very big question to ask in terms of
Yeah, one thing I always find really interesting is sort of the flip-flop that we see in the federal government on any level, right? Obama to Trump to Biden back to Trump. Those are very kind of extreme ends. And so I think that it's important to sort of reflect those when we're thinking about the policies we should implement. How do we minimize that sort of flip-flopping that both workers and employers experience? And I think it's a really important conversation, but as Kacee said, there's just limited time in debate, which means you kind of have to pick which arguments you want to go for.
So thank you for debating in our public debate. We appreciate getting to learn from you as
The 101st anniversary of Iowa's very first intercollegiate debate.
this.
Last
Yeah,
year was our 100th anniversary, and we all came into Minnesota. This is the 101.
awesome. So we had 45 votes in our public debate, and the winner in a very close debate, in my opinion, is the University of Iowa with 30 compared to 15 votes. Okay. Folks on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to end this Zoom really shortly, and I hope you all have wonderful evenings. Folks in the room, thank you all for also